Howdy ho again, everyone. In this video, I've compiled my adventures through the world of Spore, the evolution simulation game, playing through as every species you could possibly dream of. A Pitiful Worm Run, a Pacifist Carnivore Run, even a Genocidal Veganism Run, and more. All these videos are scattered about on YouTube in disarray, but today, I've edited them all together into one cohesive whole to display the evolution of the series over time, pun intended. And so, as with every journey back to the origin of species, it begins, as always, in the cell stage. Hello? For today's challenge, we revisit the 2008 evolution game, Spore. I was intrigued by the so-called Pitiful Worm Challenge, a run whose completion I saw from another YouTuber named Kingly Valence. Playing the game without evolving is difficult enough already, but doing so with a vegetarian species is perhaps the only thing more masochistic. Our species consists of a torso and a mouth. That's it. Many and various deaths await you if you try this start. I won't be speedrunning it, but there are other crazy people out there that do this kind of thing for fun. Join me as we embark on another outstandingly painful, cathartic journey of personal transformation. We spawned into the normal game world as an herbivore, yet endowed with features not allowed by this challenge. So after being brutally murdered, I ate 10 plants and acquired enough DNA points to call a mate and reformat my species to the pitiful worm. Both the flagella and the eyeball are removed, and what remains are merely the body and the mouth, that one orifice that must remain in order to grow. The remaining funds were $35. I selected the tranquil color of blue for my species, and began the true adventure. The cell stage is normally a fun period of cutting off other species and monstrously devouring them, just before they consume that last bite of life-saving salad that would have enlarged them just enough to escape devourment. This time I was confined to a dark black circle of enfeeblement. The only thing that kept me going were my aspirations at titanic proportions, constant there at the forefront of my attention. Without sight or the ability to at least swim fast, your existence is torture, much like my own life. Any species that you encounter is just death. If you see movement, run in the opposite direction. The cell stage is a testament to the value of hard work. Plainly put, billions of years of banging your head against a wall, as it turns out, works. For every 999 times I was devoured, that made the one time I ate food so much more a triumph. The only possible way to overcome is to grow and outlast. But after 3 hours of suffering, we advanced toward the creature stage, obtaining the achievements of both pacifism and completing the cell stage on hard mode. Despite every death, every sacrifice, it made them all worthwhile in that noble escape from the primordial soup. The pitiful worm resumed its journey onto land, enlarged but still completely the same. Chapter 2, the creature stage. Everyone else likes the creature stage except for me, and I'm sick of hearing about it. You're wrong, it's a bad stage. You spend most of your time running around and singing to other species you don't want to be friends with. By the time you actually meet some cool friends, they go on to jump you for no reason, murdering you and your family. Except this time, we are not only limbless, but also legally blind, lying to everyone and then murdering them with an antenna. You get DNA points, sure, but you're killing enemies only to spite them, and you can't even eat their corpses after you're done. Darwin would find our evolutionary methods both baffling and disturbing. Nonetheless, there are some hacks to get through. Eating other species' eggs, only to be deleted seconds later, is a decent way of getting DNA points during this stage. But after about 4 hours of banging my head against a wall, it was impossible to leave the nest. Every other species wanted to destroy me. I was like a worm attempting to outrun a cheetah. I began resorting to outstandingly cheap tactics, like pushing the baby version of an allied species closer to my nest so that I could murder him quietly. It just works. I began acquiring DNA that, admittedly, I did not deserve. Dear God, I hated every second of this stage, but I get it. At least you get to experience color and legs. I don't want to dwell on it too much, though. Chapter 3, the tribal stage. Ah, the tribal stage. Admittedly, somewhat underwhelming this time around. But that didn't stop us. Led by fearsome chieftain Agritile, wily Smedent, humble Sendin, Lisbeth, Mards, and who could forget Baby Chlol. We embarked on the snailish process of gathering fruit. The finest fruits were plucked, and then despite physical limitations, Chieftain Agritile began to perform his arousing, thrusting present dance to tease the nearby tribe. He confidently strutted his way into their base with selfless presence of food, dissolving any bad feelings or awkwardness that might have existed, from millions of years of coevolution. Though lacking in physical utility, we were outstandingly persuasive and intelligent, able to domesticate even animals that looked admittedly far more evolved than us. Life was good, until we were massacred. We were forced to simply watch and promise our marauders presence in the future if they stopped laying siege to our home, while desperately failing to get past them in order to extinguish the blaze. We tried again, now with yet even more pitiful worms thrusting their maracas, didgeridoos, and wooden pipes toward the aspiration of friendship with local tribes. Merriment and gaiety abounded. Yes, the whole tribe bounced and thrusted with majesty as our number of homies grew. Things were so good that we weren't even upset when one of our nearby allies began sacrificing their own people to a giant. Everyone loved us and celebrated and complimented us for being us. I should say, Spore also has a lot of amazing features, like being able to change the graphics settings midway through birthing another baby tribe member, which made our progress even faster, shadier, and more questionable. It seemed as though nothing could impede our progress. We ended the tribal stage confident and bristling with purpose, onward toward civilization. Chapter 4. The Civilization Stage. Billions of years in the making, the penultimate stage everything has been leading up to. We erect a series of cylinders to assert the dominance of our effigy upon the face of the world and its cultures. After an outburst of pictographic shouts, we light some fireworks and establish civilization. Celebration and gallivanting is had by all in the streets, and cries of jubilation ring out, all the way up to the spice geysers, toward which we race in our cars. Gradually. Our buildings are what some would call lacking in beauty, but we aren't about to let others or aesthetics impede our glorious, triumphant progress toward enlightenment. We start off weak, and we have to give everything up to forge alliances with those that are stronger. But we are so convincing in our zeal for charity and religion. We manage to divert multiple wars by complementing their society's dictators, and subvert the normie methodologies of war by sending swarms of worm cars to convert falling cities to our religion. Literally bombing ourselves with love, turning bloodshed into devotion. And then right before we've converted the entire world to our religion, the goddamn Soviet Union decides to come in and run its tanks on us. We start over again, this time slithering as quickly as possible to spice geysers, claiming a coastal city and defending it from the military, and using advanced holograms to be more convincing. The world will be won, in time, and we oust false cadres from power, bellowing with triumph, the world over, bribing our enemies to fight each other for money. Whatever it takes, that's what we're doing, and we're not gonna stop. Not even if a giant bug attacks our capital city and destroys every turret. It's like the star-bellied Sneetches all over again. And it's not long before we've convinced most of the major factions, upgrading our abilities and allowing us to assimilate more cities faster. More housing leads to more cars, more cities, and yet more conquering. Our race proliferates and takes to the skies and the seas, for there is a much larger world out there that needs conquering. I'm convinced that the game attempted to stage a war allegorical of World War II leading up into the Cold War, as there were plentiful, vaguely Russian accents. However, this time it didn't end with the buildup of nuclear missiles, but rather an entirely unexpected mass religious awakening, whereby we brainwashed the entire planet into agreeing. Never mind the murky moral implications of this act. Thousands of worm cars were destroyed. The war was finally over. We continued as one people. Wowzers! Chapter 5, the space stage. At some point in time, one of the pitiful worms decides that it would be a great idea if we erected an even larger cylinder and got inside of it. We fashion an original spaceship, and the exciting Age of Aquarius begins. Whole new frontiers of colonization and terrorizing local species, and just generally bothering the animals on the ground. It begins with abduction, because our species has finally achieved perfect unity, which means it's time to go annoy other people. Scanning, abduction, kidnapping, and eventually zapping them to death. These are all activities that are high on our agenda for the next 1,000 years. The spaceship design is purely aesthetic. It doesn't make a difference that it looks like a worm anymore. So we go higher and higher out into space, until we are just so high. Wow, the small blue dot phenomenon is overwhelming as we zoom out from the planet to the solar system to the galaxy. Worlds of artifacts and ancient civilizations to behold. Warning signals and pirates that look alarmingly similar to us. No match for our bombs. The whole universe is worth it for the spice trade that we are uncovering, and we will stop at no length to terraform planets, pooping out colonies and altering their surface. But now I must confide in you that, overall, having transcended every technological boundary, the intergalactic ennui is overwhelming. How I begin to miss the days of struggling as a cell, now hemmed into bureaucratic meetings. Even discovering and kidnapping new species fails to give me the dopamine it once did. So with the righteous boredom of a rich kid at an art school, I coast over planets. But here's where things get interesting. This planet is a cube, or attempting to be a cube. Who can really say what it is? Its inhabitants, however, are mentally ill. In an act of diplomatic grace, we ask the Birdman for a mission in order to secure his friendship. The errand is to exterminate several infected frog people on a remote world for no particular reason. Stealthily, an enormous spaceship hovering nonchalantly, the plan is, above one of their capital cities. Try not to cause commotion as you heat beam them to death. Killing is definitely wrong, but it just goes to show how seriously I take friendship above all else. We have secured our first ally and trading partner. While intelligent friends need to be wooed and won over, unintelligent species like plants and cows are prime candidates for a series of interplanetary kidnappings that I'm now about to wage. That's how terraforming works, folks. Just pick things up over here and put them down there. The tree's placement trajectory is decidedly disturbing, with some of them being rejected from the surface and sent careening ominously directly into the sun. It's not long before the whole planet is terraformed and our quest takes us deeper into the galaxy. We encounter the strangest species, the Kurgal Empire, spiritual arachnophibians. We come in peace, and their goals are noble, but carry with them a great burden of moral doubt. In order to obtain their friendship, we must kidnap a shaman for them to take in as a teacher. Looking upon their naive neglect for human rights in their effort to spiritually better their souls, this was perhaps the strangest quest in our billion-year evolution. How could this happen? A species of altruistic but mentally handicapped spider people. I pitied them, but I had to assent. Spice, after all, is a valuable commodity, and I needed trade routes to get deeper into the galaxy. On the way home, our ship blew up accidentally. Nothing to fear, we were reincarnated. The Kurgal were glad, but a whole species' gladness based on the unexpiated tears for the lost tribesman? What could he have been to his people? I sold all my possessions, left that pitiful planet, and used the ship explosion ghost save exploit in order to make my way to the center of the galaxy, becoming one with the universe, and tiring of all the moral throes and those conflicts that stood in the way of our evolution. And then I got stuck right here. Video games were unfortunately just built different in 2006. Now I sojourn, purgatorially trapped in a vacuum to wander forever. I am one with not the center of the galaxy, but the space dust. But a piece of me still resides in the cell stage, and that's why Spore is one of the greatest games ever made. Hello. For today's challenge, I'm going to play Spore as a pacifist carnivore, a creature that hates what it is, and just wants to make friends, but needs to keep eating other people to survive. I got this idea from a Reddit post about the weirdest Spore challenges you can try. Imagine that every waking moment of your life, you wish to devour the ones you most loved, but a strict rule of self-discipline were the only thing preventing you from eating friends and family. I decided to name my species not the carnivore, but the kindivore. Myriad possibilities unfold before us. How will we evolve? How will we be peaceful and eat meat at the same time? So many questions. So starting in the least likely of places? It all starts at Chapter 1, the cell stage. Born out of a soup of congealing amino acids, our humble protagonist traces back its unlikely origins. Our initial advances at befriendment are unwanted. Other species flee in outright terror. Attempts to eat kelp are unsuccessful and borderline futile. We are not even physically capable of digesting Vegemite or other veggie matter. It's a lost cause to us. Even other carnivores fear us and run away. We eat only discarded meat, left there only by the outcomes of their violent quarrels. But the kindivore endures and even thrives. Undeterred, the Carnivore evolves a smaller mouth and larger, cuter eyes to help other species feel more relaxed and less intimidated by its remarkable jowls. Unfortunately for our little fellow, even other carnivores are still repulsed by the sight of it. But the bitter life of a single cell making its sigma male grind up the evolutionary tree is one of constant competition. How will we adapt to eat meat while respecting the personal boundaries of other species? Violence is abhorrent, but meat is delicious. Hard work pays off. Through constant bulking off the scraps of meat without hurting anyone, we manage to scale to the next rung on the evolutionary ladder. We still reject violence, but we grow a new set of flagella, rendering us faster and more motile. With 2 more flagella, we can both avoid predators and obtain the meat that we need. Darting hither and thither out of the way of fights. It's not long before we find our evolutionary niche. Once we have that down, there will be no more competition. If we hide behind larger creatures, out of whose way we can dart quickly, we can play scavengers, turning and speeding away from snatching maws, and into the little meat that they have left behind, nibbling only at decayed corpses. Is it shameful? Yes. But you have to start somewhere. We also stare at vegetarians. Although they look delicious, it would be wrong to hurt them. Therefore, we usually just follow around predators. We develop thrusters, rendering us even more motile. And even if we can't save our fellow brethren, we can still eat them. So we zoom from cannibalistic feast to pacifist friendship, darting into free food every which way. Darwin would be proud. We develop a symbiotic relationship with the electric butt-sapping herbivore species, and whether they are preyed upon or deter their oppressors, the carnivorous blue cells, it's a win-win for the Carnivore, for it requires no violence on our part, and it always ensures a meal. Yes, through our motility, we manage to scale up in the evolutionary cycle. Each and every generation makes such great sacrifices, eating bit by bit, continuously reproducing. Evolution, after all, is nature's version of the so-called American dream, for whatever that moniker is worth. Move from one horrible life situation into one slightly less horrible life situation for the sake of the next generation's survival and prosperity. Thus, we navigate the primordial soup, the only carnivorous species that never took a single life in its way up the evolutionary tree. And after so many generations, the Carnivore moves on to land, meat by meat, part by part. It's all for the greater good. And as we develop minds, we ascend. And the genetic revolution is ready to boldly take its first steps onto land. Chapter 2. The Creature Stage. Ah, the Creature Stage. Admittedly, I don't hate this stage as much as I said before. The Carnivore leaves the soup behind and uses its brand new legs to establish a nest, laying eggs to young baby carnivores that now sprout their own legs. Fun activities like discovering fossils await, meeting friends, and befriending friends through song. But making friends isn't easy, and involves constant starvation. Inasmuch as the Carnivore enjoys making friends, it would also enjoy eating those friends. Therefore, the life of a Carnivore is constant suffering, stifling the need to eat in order to abide by its high moral principles. Most of us die of starvation only shortly after we've reproduced. At this point in time, an attempt in earnest is made to eat fruit. The attempt results in vomit, but this is no deterrent for the Carnivore. More starvation and mating. Thus, the Carnivore lives like the mayfly, the tragic creature of our own world, whose fate it is to live an alarming 5 minutes. A precious short 5 minutes, but a full life of altruism and self-sacrifice it is nonetheless, and it's enough for evolution to take place. Most Carnivores reach sexual maturity only 5 minutes after they're born, after which time they make friends and dance. By the end of the day, the male mates with another female of the kind shortly before dying of starvation next to the body of their offspring. The next generation of Carnivores destined to live out the same life as their parents. We evolve mustaches and legs, and the lifespans begin to last just a little bit longer, but the starvation continues nonetheless. We simply ignore this starvation, and any who do kill others are ostracized from our packs. But despite its happy social disposition, the Carnivore's internal mind state is stoic almost beyond belief. And no matter how much it is harassed by other weaker, less evolved species, no matter how easy it would be with our evolved hands and feet to rip out the flesh of the other delicious-looking species and devour them, we turn not to violence, but instead run away and tank the blows from our persecutors. Some people may tell you that Spore is a kid's game. Au contraire. This game is realistic and scientific, but it is true that it would take you perhaps a half hour of doing nothing in order to starve to death during the creature stage. You'd have to be really, really bad to mess up this part. So for the most part, in the creature stage, it doesn't really make a difference whether you're a carnivore, or an herbivore, or an omnivore, when you can just decide not to eat at all, and that's a perfectly valid option. We didn't eat, we didn't defend ourselves, and yet somehow, through perseverance, we survived. These are just a few of the shameful anecdotes of the myriad humiliations necessitated by our climb up the evolutionary ladder. We grew to love danger. We enjoyed being hit while we danced for others. We were dancing for our fallen comrades. At this point in time, the Carnivore evolves the largest brain, breaking out of the frame. I thought I would never see the day. We encounter an advanced civilization of worm people. We evolve back our mustaches, which we had to get rid of in order to do the socializing, and we dance enough. Now we get the brain that breaks out of the frame. Oh, frabjuste, Kalukale. So many sacrifices, so many lives lost. We have surmounted so many obstacles to get to this day. Chapter 3. The Tribal Stage. Billions and millions of years in the making. No more dying to predators. Now we are the masters of nature. Epigenetic revolution unfolds, and the Carnivore begins shaping its own culture in a peaceful way. We eat eggs because eggs aren't people. Don't question it or else. Subsistence for our species requires animal products, but not the meat itself. That would be warlike. So we resort to goading nearby animals into domestication, leading them back to our base with promises of treats. They are surprisingly completely fine with us kidnapping their families. They lack critical thinking, and they go back to dancing. Our food source is now secured. You see, while we're pacifist, we're also utilitarian. To build the foundation of our peaceful civilization, that's just the way it's going to be. Every other effort of our species is focused on friend-making, impressing others with our didgeridoo playing, spectacular fireworks, and it's all underpinned by a robust egg production. Our mustaches grow bushier, manlier, and more gregarious. Even enemies who T-pose into our base aggressively are thwarted and pacified by our generous gifts. Here we see Chieftain Cole chasing down an errant egg napper. When their tribe comes aggressively with torches, we give them presents to stop them from torching us. Time after time, the Carnivore demonstrates its agreeable nature, and even uncultured violent pigs like the typhugs are won over by our gracious hospitality and decorum. All past woes are forgotten when they hear our song and melt in rapture with our harmonious polyphony. One by one, the tribes of our planet have to admit that we are pretty chill to be around, and it's not long before they are the ones sending presents to us. All of this is, of course, cause for more celebration and dancing, at which the Carnivore improves. Thus, domestication of local animals catalyzed an epigenetic and cultural revolution. But our struggles were, of course, not yet over. No, not even close to it. Goddamn giant birds kept devouring our tribe members while we serenaded them in song. A stick in the sand. Giant birds are no joke, but nothing could stop us on our kind crusade of friend-making. We exited that era renewed and bristling with purpose. Of all the tribes we visited, nothing but 10 out of 10s. Perfect score, for none would stand in the way of our plan. Great things were on the way. In this fashion, our species, from its humble origins, took the world by storm and became the planet's most advanced race, both culturally and economically. Giant burbs, worms, or whatever the unpredictable planet might hurl at us, we used it all to become faster and more resilient. The weak were devoured, and the Alpha Carnivore became the basis of the species we know today. What lay in store next for our species? Chapter 4. The Civilization Stage. At some point in time, Carnivores discover the school of Art Deco, build a skyscraper, and agree to enact policies supporting green global energy usage. Then they invent Tesla. Something out of Dr. Seuss. All decisions are unanimous since we have evolved out of disagreement, and we share the same blockchain ledger. Call it a common cultural memory. There is an entity of the Carnivore. What that entity is, it does not fall to our lot to ask. We can merely observe what took place next in our planet's history. As the Carnivore evolved, dissenting factions composed of cadres of cultural elites rose up and created their own city-states, subverting and terrorizing the dominant peaceful ideology that had allowed the Carnivore to subsist upon a diet of eggs rather than the meat of others. Our dietary revolution was at stake. These factions waged war, a woeful return to the cannibalistic mania that had characterized since undocumented annals of the Carnivore's evolution. Efforts were made to brainwash, persuade the rebelling factions to forfeit their warlike causes. One by one, the planet's cities fell in line. Whether that's by the use of Orwellian, dystopian brain drain friendship saucers, or simple diplomacy is anyone's guess. What we do know is that in this game, if you give anyone enough Spore bucks, you can prevent them from being upset with you if you're actively at war with them and blockading one of their cities. Money talks, and it prevents retaliation. And we sent not bombs, but melodious radio waves of classical music. One by one, the free nations of man fell. How could they be trusted with power if they were warlike? We continued paying everyone off while simultaneously declaring war on them. This, along with complimenting them, was after all the only way to prevent them from fighting back while we appropriated their cities. Through the entirety of the conflict, we did not kill a single enemy, or even damage any of their property. We didn't even build turrets in self-defense, because that would not be the pacifist way. Our crusade concludes with the pacifist version of nuclear war. A melody that so fills the rest of the world with rapture that all conflict is forgotten, and our species can once again be united under a common bond of absolute obedience. Don't question it was all absolutely necessary. Chapter 5, The Space Stage. After accomplishing the great feat of unifying an entire species behind the common goal of peace at any cost, even free will, advances in converting egg matter into not only food, but also rocket fuel, allow the Carnivore to fashion fleets of starships so advanced in their appearance that even Teslas would look primitive and Flintstonian by comparison. We spend the next 1,000 years exploring the cosmos, meeting other hideous species, and paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars to like us. Whenever they don't like us enough, we buy a happy ray. This actually exists, and we beam them with it to Kingdom Come. Dubbed a friendly tool, we use this to coerce the rest of the universe into a favorable disposition with our species. Having established trade routes and ensured the prosperity of all Carnivores to come, the only thing left to do is cheese the Ghost Save Ship exploit to peacefully get past the Groks undetected and make a pilgrimage to the center of the universe. What's at the center of the universe? That's for me to know and you to find out. Today I'm going back in time to explore Spore, everyone's favorite game about evolution. The other day, I was on Reddit. I know. Sometimes even I am frightened of how cool I am. There's one very cash money challenge idea. The Genocidal Herbivore. A vegan species of a diet restricted to vegetable and fruit, but capable of mass violence upon other species for evolution. Since I've pretty much played Spore only as a pacifist, I thought this would be different. And it was. So it began. The cell stage. Meet our species, the Herbivore. An organism whose inability to digest meat belies its destiny at the top of the food chain. Now merely a single cellular organism capable of digesting only romaine lettuce. I began as a nice, smooth boy, gliding innocuously from vegetable to vegetable, growing and changing. Like Original Sin, I discovered the spike, the first evolutionary adaptation that allowed my species to commit violent acts of aggression against evolutionary competitors. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Herbivore began as an entirely non-aggressive species, mating and merely adapting these spiky features as a mechanism for defense, like an angry, photosynthetic Beyblade. This was how the Herbivore carved out its early evolutionary niche, being propelled by stronger big boys toward larger hunks of romaine lettuce, until it developed such low self-esteem and good defensive mechanisms for curling up in the fetal position. As Abraham Lincoln once said, the best offense is a good defense. That may be false, but it sounds good, and it works in my script. The Herbivore developed spikes all over its supple body through natural selection. And by 3,300,000,000 years later, it had developed a small boy, smooth brain, capable of reason. Unfortunately, the whole species was cursed with polyphemus cyclops disease and had one eye, even as it ventured onto land for the exciting embarkment upon the creature stage. The herbivore retained its innocuous babby mouth, but sprouted supple, toned thighs for its amphibious adventure onto the sands. From the very beginning, it's fruit trees. But honestly, the herbivore's cell stage looks cute in comparison to the nightmarish, horrifying abomination that resembles Kimimaro from Naruto. With that in mind, it's not long before our anime montage of training begins. Our protagonist, the herbivore, develops mean, downward slanting eyes to demonstrate that we really mean business. Like a vegan bodybuilder, we're murderously violent toward other people and believe that other people aren't good as us because they haven't suffered, so we turn our anger against them and other intelligent life forms. Although the herbivore didn't eat its victims, it flexed on them with its luscious, voluptuous thighs and posterior. Enemies didn't know whether to run away or rush toward us in interspecies mating ritual because of how thick with 2 C's we were. This fake-out lent our species the evolutionary niche required for non-competitively making its way up the food chain. What I'm trying to say is, since we didn't eat our enemies, we were entirely removed from the food chain anyway. The perfect evolutionary fertilizer for the enwrinkling of the smooth brain over the next 621 million years. To compete with the bigger gym bros using artificially enhanced dietary supplements, we evolved the last of our physical features to let other species know that not only were we vegan, but we were also much better than everyone, capable of growing beards and mustaches that were literally grass, moose antlers to show that we had become one with the natural kingdom, and hook claws to naturally help us deadlift barbells greater than our body weight, while still retaining excellent form and uprightness in the lumbar spine. The herbivore developed the ability to hunt in packs, downing greater, larger predators, and ultimately donned tools, weapons, and armor, including knee pads, butt pads, a stupid-looking helmet, and a silly mask that, honestly, the mask wasn't very effective, but ignore that for now. The tribal stage. The tribal stage commenced with the seeking of more natural, plant-based dietary supplements. Our ethical quest of destiny began with the hunting down of swole unicorn boys, distracted by their run-in with a giant monster, an epic carnivore, attacking their camp. Using the accentuated waddling of our butt pads to distract our enemies, we were able to burn down their camp and render them and their base predatory impulses extinct once and for all while subsisting entirely on a vegetable-based diet. Because cannibalizing the corpses of our enemies would be savagery beneath our dignity. Besides, eating so much grass, after all, rendered us innate camouflage. What I'm trying to say is, by eating the grass, we became invisible. Yes, indiscernible to the naked eye. We used this new advantage to surprise and burn down the Pink Village. They never saw it coming. We continued conquering other tribes and even invented our own culture, taking part in rituals that sometimes even I didn't expect, like the mariachi dance of veganism. The next invention in our technology was the throwing spear, a classic vegan accoutrement. Not only did we not consume animal products, but we also maimed our own flesh in a sign of solidarity for the helpless animals around us. Our enemies, on the other hand, were unable to withstand the pain of being impaled with 5 spears at once, and succumbed to the bleeding. All it showed was that they lacked in the hefty, resilient amount of butt meat required for withstanding that level of pain. It was our genetic destiny to defend the weak. These other species simply wouldn't fit into our new world order of radical, aggressive veganism. So they fell. The Brown Village, the Pink Village, the Cyan Village, leading to sillier masks, pointier hats, and more advanced, contoured butt pads. The tribe thrived, collecting vegetables between invasions, making sure always to leave enough for the stupid lesser animals around us. It concluded with the Green Village and the Purple Village. But at this time, civilization took a new turn. Someone said, "Vegan Anarchist Bookstore," and suddenly, all began cheering. Rather than a tribe, our civilization had a new hub. Tribal leaders spoke of vegan nuclear war, vegan tanks. We celebrated our glorious civic revolution by building, the Prius. I mean, this Prius. This one has cannons and claws so that when it walks around on the ground it looks like it's going noom 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 noom. There it was, civilization seated by the glorious invention of the Vegan Anarchist Bookstore and Prius. and we were all really mad. But we channeled our anger to innovate. We built vegan photosynthesis factories, vegan entertainment chamber, and gentrified inner-city housing. It wasn't long before we'd built up reliable, strong cities, and our Priuses were bombing hostile city-states with their sustainable, eco-friendly cannons. They all fell. The green people, the orange people, the red people. Our sea and aircraft were also Priuses, but they were red because of how angry we were at all the other people for not agreeing with us. Our vegan planes shot lasers, conquering the pink nation, the other red nation, blue, yellow, and at last the purple nation, turning our eyes to the skies and the glorious invention of civilization's ship to the stars, a Prius that could be launched into outer space. The space stage, 3,933,119,600 years since the dawn of our species, the Herbivore took its first intrepid steps beyond the confines of our atmosphere in a Prius, now outfitted with GPS technology from 2018 and able to navigate among the stars. I usually hate the space stage because it's a real grind, but I must say it's much more entertaining to destroy rather than befriend other civilizations. Instead of going on needless chore after chore, you just zap them. Even if I lost 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 Priuses, it was enough to annihilate the buildings of the Draguzi Empire, whose cities fell like dominoes in our conquest of their homeworld, even after they kept trying to surrender, but we wouldn't let them. We let the Werbles Empire off with a trade route. War doesn't pay for itself, especially without quantitative easing. After solidifying our trade route, we offered our hand in alliance. They decided they would agree on one condition: perform for them a favor as a sign of our loyalty. We agreed, but as luck would have it, agreeing to do the favor was enough to make them like us enough so that they just agreed to the alliance anyway, without us even performing the favor at all. Sometimes in Spore, the AI is bizarre and naive. We used this against the Algernon Empire, against whom we kept declaring war, bombing their cities, then apologizing for bombing their cities by sending them money. This made them completely okay with this. Then we declared war again, bombed their cities again, and sent them more money. They kept agreeing to this until we had annihilated their planet. But honestly, the space stage in Spore is my least favorite. It's just not fun. I bombed and lied to so many aliens that when I got to the Groks, who control the entire center of the galaxy, with just one colony on every single star system, it's like, how is anyone supposed to conquer these people? Just a sea of red. Even with every single ship upgrade, I couldn't stem the tide, so I decided that was enough. One good arm of the spiral galaxy we had conquered. Satisfactory performance in my opinion. The Herbivore had come further than the Carnivore, the Pitiful Worm, or any other bizarre species that now inhabit my even more growingly bizarre save file in this incredible game, this masterpiece of 2008 technology. In today's video, I'm going to beat Spore as the weakest possible species, the Pitiful Worm, but as a carnivore instead of an herbivore this time. For the traditional Pitiful Worm start, I already beat the game and made it to the center of the galaxy when I first tried this challenge about a year ago. Instead, today we're going to be playing as a carnivore to beat this amazing game, which is the world's greatest evolution simulator. Before we begin, shout out to Kingly Valence, as well as this Reddit post on Spore. This is where I got the idea for this challenge, as well as the original Pitiful Worm challenge, which goes back to Naratiza. If you like this, you'll like theirs even more. But first, a word from our sponsor, me. That's right, I'm the sponsor of today's video. Just kidding. There's actually no sponsor. I tricked you. Life begins as it always does in Spore with the cell stage. Since we can't spawn in as the Pitiful Worm, we need to collect DNA until we can mate, and rebuild our species into the right shape. With only the carnivore mouth, and no flagella or eyes, we're ready to get started on our journey up the evolutionary chain. But fortunately, this phase starts off easier than the herbivore's Pitiful Worm Run. With the carnivore mouth, we can get booped right on the snoot, and that will fling us out into the primordial ooze. I use this technique to find food, or look for an opening, where I could opportunistically dispatch my foes by juking them out and tear them limb from limb for a meal and some DNA. Since I was so slow without any flagella, I was unable to pursue the faster herbivores I would normally feed upon. So instead, I used the technique of guarding a piece of lettuce as bait, then devouring weaker species once they were in my clutches. That being said, this usually didn't work, and I spent most of the cell stage getting eaten repeatedly. 119 times to be exact. Just in different ways that were more or less rage-inducing. But whenever one pitiful worm died, another got up to replace it. I spent 4 hours guarding lettuce, then being ambushed and manhandled by bigger, stronger species, then double-teamed and devoured right before I could get any food. The only times I could get a meal were when people were literally chased directly into my mouth. I was desperate for food. Sometimes I'd call over a mate, not for reproduction, but in the hopes that a larger predator would come along and kill the potential mate so that I could cannibalize the remains. Shameful, but honestly, probably not such a bad idea. However, it usually didn't even work, and a larger predator would just eat both of us. All this as I desperately tried to eat my friends before I was brutally murdered by even stronger predators. I honestly think it got harder as meat became less common, and predators got even stronger. There's almost no way to break past their defenses, and I spent hours getting bonked, only to wait for a lucky piece of meat. It was mostly attrition, but eventually I did acquire enough DNA to evolve, bringing an end to the cell stage, and setting off to an exciting start on the creature stage. On dry land 21 billion years later. Despite all logical conclusions that any other species should have evolved first, the carnivorous pitiful worm developed lungs and began making nests on the shores after billions of years. Again, since we're blind, we're confined to a circle of darkness in our sight. Trapped with the level 1 mouth, all we could do was sing our sad little song to the first few creatures who would accept us as a potential friend. But unfortunately, they were the only ones who would ever accept us. And no one we met had greater than level 1 singing, so we couldn't get any pack mates to help us along. And so after we collected the first DNA from socializing with the Jubals and the Tunks, we failed to befriend the Ukas. This was a turning point. Distraught at our inability to socialize with higher level creatures, I decided that we would turn to violence for the rest of creature phase. At first, it didn't work out, and we spent most of the time getting mauled and eaten by epic gigachads. Actually, just most of the time it didn't work out, so I relied upon sneaky tactics, like running up to other creatures' nests and devouring their eggs for some quick DNA points. Nest migrations were another way to secure precious DNA, but the main way we grew was through cheap pathfinding tactics, like leading other species back to our nest, then triple teaming them with worms. Take that, evolution! So we grew through teamwork. But usually that meant just getting lucky some of the time. We had one watershed moment when a rogue crew core just stood still for 10 minutes in front of our nest as he was slowly devoured by 4 of a number. I legitimately can't believe that this happened. It secured like 100 DNA or something ridiculous. But I'd be lying if I told you that didn't backfire against us horribly, as I also got stuck in my nest in an insane loop that kept causing the game to crash inexplicably. So I had to start over the entire challenge from scratch at the cell stage, since you can't back up your saves. In a word, it was torment. But at least my untimely deaths were punctuated by cheap victories utilizing the horrible pathfinding. Maybe it was because the designers of Spore perhaps never imagined that someone would try to subject himself to a challenge this dumb. All in all, it took me over 10 hours of restarting and creating the entire planet all over again to finish this damn phase. I'll see you in therapy. And so ended the creature stage, and good riddance. The tribal stage. Everyone else hates the tribal stage but me, and I'm sick of hearing about it. It's one of my favorite phases. Unfortunately, as much as I like it, I had to restart the entire game a 3rd time due to a starting location that was simply unwinnable. We were much too far from the water for us to squirm along the land toward any source of fish, which was the primary staple of our diet. So after another 5 to 10 hours of grinding, I stopped keeping track at this point. We finally spawned with our huts near the sea. We domesticated animals. We hatched offspring using the essential free baby hatching bug technique, which honestly makes this challenge possible and is totally legit. And we fished for our food, because we weren't moving around very fast, and our pathfinding looked like this. It was a nightmare. On hard mode in Spore, almost all the tribes want to kill you when they spawn in, and you have to keep giving them presents every 3 seconds to prevent them from hating you. And let me tell you, they change their minds fast. We We could hardly keep up, sending people presents and gift baskets in desperate urgency, as their primitive tribesmen made tracks toward our huts with warlike intent. It was a brief spell of relief whenever the epic monsters attacked these neighbors, but this phase also took many attempts to figure out. I think our whole village was burned down at least 3 or 4 times in various diplomatic failures. But what I did figure out was that if you get other tribes to smiling Blueface, which can only be obtained by sending them a present, then quickly squirming your entire tribe with didgeridoos to sing songs to them, you can secure lasting peace. This was important because otherwise we'd have to fight a war on 4 separate fronts, and that would be totally unwinnable. So after we secured peace with everyone, and kept diplomats ready with more fruit baskets, we gathered up strength by collecting fish, then declaring war upon them one by one, as the others sent us fruit as signs of their friendship, but we were slaughtered only just barely in time to take out each tribe. The purple tribe, the orange tribe, the yellow tribe, the green tribe, and of course the blue tribe. With each fallen nation came the adoption of new and destructive weapons of war, namely the throwing spear. It helped that we had predator bonuses from the previous 2 phases, after our peaceful fake-out to limit ourselves to wars we could win, one at a time, and so drew to a close the tribal phase, which is objectively the best phase. The civilization stage. The pitiful, primitive worm people evolved militaristically, developing stupid-looking structures to produce spore bucks, as well as armed cavalry and a naval fleet. The civilization stage was also horrible and required several restarts. Since we were so weak, we relied upon attacking even weaker city-states, while the strong, aggressive nations used all their resources to fight one another. In the meantime, we used our first mover advantage to opportunistically secure spice geysers all over the globe. Then, we paid thousands upon thousands of spore bucks as tribute to the strongest nations so that they wouldn't kill us. My plan was working. When they asked for more money, we just gave it to them and begged them not to kill us. They liked us and we were allied with the strongest. Unfortunately, once they took over the world, we were just subservient to them. That was not part of my plan, so I had to restart again, and instead focus all our efforts on ruthless economic production. It didn't work again, so I had to restart yet again. This time, we just focused on money, and my god did we grind. We leapt on more spice geysers in the ocean this time, to keep them from the Brown Nation. Then we declared war on the Crimson Nation, whom we cut off economically at the ocean spice geysers. Opportunistically, after they had thrown all their resources at killing the Cyan Economic Nation north of our borders, we seized their city when they were weak, crippling their expansion. Then we just let the Indigo and Pink Nations fight it out, while we declared war on Brown and took their sea spice geysers. Then we paid them off to stop hating us, and expanded over the continent to secure 4 cities, unlocking the Gadget Bomb, which is basically a silly E-rated version of a nuclear missile, with surprisingly realistic graphical effects. We used this against Pink, and then we lost the city again, and then I got pretty fed up with that, so I nuked their capital in an act of vengeance. They didn't stand a chance. After that, Brown Nation started gaining momentum, so I also nuked their capital city. At that point, we saved up 48,000 spore bucks, unlocking the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Barrage, or ICBM for short, a highly destructive victory that destroyed most of the world in the goofiest nuclear Armageddon. Cheap? Yes. But could we have done it without nukes? Probably not. The space stage. This space stage is objectively the worst. And after playing this damn phase so many times, I refuse to play it again. So we'll simply blow up our ship over and over and venture for old time's sake as the ghost ship to the center of the universe. With a great sense of deja vu, Spore is, once again, the perfect game. Since the dawn of time, evolution has favored positive traits in the progression of our species. But what if the opposite were true? To test this out, today I'm going to be playing Spore, the evolution simulation game, as the most inconvenient possible organism. Meet our protagonist, the Mouthinbutt species, named thus because of its mouth, which is located on the butt, of course. From its prehistoric primordial ooze, starting in the cell stage, the Mouthinbutt species would do whatever it took to overcome its inconvenient limitations, Every time we evolve, we faced a new and horrible wrinkle that would make our continued advancement up the evolutionary tree both baffling and illogical. So it all begins in Phase 1. At first, just a microscopic speck in the soupy seas of planet Mouthinbutt. The Mouthinbutt began its evolutionary journey with 2 small flagella for propulsion, spikes for defense, eyes for vision, and a small mouth located, that's right, on the butt, of course. But how did the Mouthinbutt survive its early cellular stages and carve out its niche in survival? All among a sea of vicious predators, whose mouths were all in the right place, contrary to that of the Mouthinbutt. The answer is simple. By generating momentum toward its meals, then thrusting its rear end directly forward, the Mouthinbutt was able to conserve momentum and swallow nutrients. This allowed it to carve out a select and special niche in the liquid goop of its prehistoric past. And keeping the mouth limited to the butt, of course, lent more room for the development of spikes on its front side to shield itself from the huge mouths of hungry predators. Surprisingly, this actually worked. Many larger predators bit their way to an early and bloody grave by trying in vain to feast on the spiny and unappetizing front side of many a Mouthinbutt. Unfortunately, the Mouthinbutt was usually unable to eat these larger predators because its mouth was simply too small. It evolved electrical zapping orbs, buzz, to electrocute other people and eat them once they had been subdued. And before you know it, 3,700,000,000 years later, the Mouthinbutt as we know it today swam up to the surface, peeking its mouthless face out of the primordial soup of planet Mouthinbutt, and walked its first intrepid steps onto the brave new world of the dawning sun on drier shores. Bound for new adventures, debacles, and skullduggery, but above all, bloodthirsty and carnivorous violence. And so we entered the creature stage. If the challenge of the cell stage was turning around and generating enough momentum to eat things with its butt, then the challenge of the creature stage was something equally counterintuitive and formidable. The Mouthinbutt was no longer as impacted by the inconvenience of the position of its mouth on its butt anymore, but now it faced the challenge of attacking everyone that was friendly and trying to make friends with every species that hated us. Yet another existential nightmare of torment. Can you imagine having to kill everyone who likes you and befriending everyone who's trying to murder you? During this phase, the Mouthinbutt's physical form evolved, but the mouth remained on the butt, of course, just as the legs and torso elongated to create something almost completely redundant. To be perfectly clear, everything was in the wrong place on our species. We looked like a big wiener. We fought the spittoons, the octolons, and the klaatu, all of whom hardly put up a fight since they were non-violent species. We devoured their bodies. People got tougher, and we started dying more. Then when the eye monkeys laid an egg to have a baby, we devoured their unborn child right before them. And then we did a dance to try to be their friends again. These were the sacrifices it took throughout our evolutionary history to fully live up to the Mouthinbutt name. My game kept crashing every single time that I died, and this was both unexpected and baffling. Ultimately, we were totally unable to make friends with almost all of the species since they completely hated us. That's right, red face hatred level. And once your face turns red with anger, there's no going back. That's the point of no return. You can't ever be friends again. So at this point in our evolution, I just gave up on socializing entirely and started killing everyone who wasn't a Mouthinbutt. Our brains grew, and we increased. We, the Mouthinbutts, were superior. We killed all of the happy people, like the big dumb pink Muttagals or the tranquil blue Huari, neither of whom expected a pack of fearsome Mouthinbutts to roll up out of nowhere on them and literally just yeet them into extinction. The creature stage ended when my computer started repeatedly crashing whenever I died. Naturally, I grew concerned, and with the Mouthinbutt species having evolved toxic spewers and lethal, striking hands, it was time to advance our species into the tribal stage. The tribal stage. The Mouthinbutt donned war gear, fearsome and foreboding, masks on its feet where its eyeballs were located, a leaf skirt on its hips, where its mouth sat perched on the butt, of course. and then a bunch of hats, just for more health. And so resumed the Mouthinbutt's counterintuitive journey through the mists of time, and yet another baffling and counterintuitive set of strategies. This time, we made efforts to send people presents, then kill them. That's it. As it turns out, this was already my dominant tribal phase strategy, but it was nonetheless difficult since everyone hated us. The only reason I ever managed to win this phase is through flagrant and oblivious cheating. Namely, spawning infinite tribal babies through the graphical settings bug exploit. The first time I tried, everyone died. We were invaded and massacred horribly, so I had to reload my save. Then I tried again. Through persistent cheating, I was able to eventually conquer all the tribes with my illegal clone babies. I sent everyone presents to get them to neutral yellow face. Then I invaded the brown tribe and spared none. Then I sent more presents out to placate the green and cyan tribes. We won't kill you in a few minutes. While I invaded pink. Then I sent even more presents to placate and reassure the cyan tribe again. That was definitely the last time we would ever kill another tribe. We're sorry, please accept this gift. Then we backstabbed and killed the green tribe right in front of them. Then we lied again immediately and killed the cyan tribe. At last I killed the purple tribe in exactly the same pattern of flat-out lies and skullduggery. Survival necessitates the art of deception at times. And we are better than everyone, and it's okay that we lied. The civilization stage. If the Mouthinbutts had turned to sending people presents, then brutally massacring them during the tribal stage, then the civilization stage was even more intense. What new and counterintuitive strategy would we venture next? Generally, I prefer to turtle during the civilization stage. I enjoy the feeling of having one major city that's self-sustaining. Then I like to automate its defenses, but only when I'm fully self-sufficient and powerful. Entertainment and factories. Only then do I normally venture out to the rest of the planet to conquer it. Instead, this time around, I decided I would build only houses and maybe just a few factories, and then be extremely aggressive claiming the spice geysers from my impudent and meddlesome neighbors. When you can't think of a strategy, violence is the only answer. So just as in the cell stage, we overcompensated for our limitations by just attacking everyone. The city hall was upside down, the cars nonsensical, and the houses utterly disappointing in architectural sensibility. I failed the first time I played through the civilization stage, but only because units in Spore do not go where you ask them to. I suck at RTS games. So after we bombed the living daylights out of every city, I had to conveniently restart, since I had literally no infrastructure to back up my holdings. And the Yellow Nation was better than me. Attempt number 2. This time, everything just worked. I built more cars than it was sustainable to build. I procrastinated and panicked, which happens to be the dominant strategy here. And then, whenever any civilization was getting strong, I'm looking at you, Yellow Nation, I sent my army of cars to poop on them in completely unfair and one-sided combat scenarios. I built stupid boats and planes, and factories that looked like 3 pieces of tofu stacked one on top of the other. Our cities had no culture and no entertainment at all. So whenever a religious nation attacked us with song and made sweet moan, I panicked and blew them up. It required decisive combat prowess, but through enough saving and reloading, I finally managed to overcome the Yellow Nation, who I'm pretty sure were cheating, so it's even Steven. They had way too many boats and it didn't make sense. And that was pretty much it. Now we had 4 cities, which allowed us to create airplanes. We shot all the religious nations before they could even arrive at our borders. And then we launched gadget bombs, which are basically child-friendly, E-rated nukes, all the way across the continent to blow everyone else up. Noom. Our plans of world domination concluded when we beamed down lasers from the sky onto the Brown Nation. Then that freed up enough Spore bucks to launch ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, literally across the planet to blow up anyone who disagreed with us. This led to world domination and everlasting peace. Then commenced the space stage. And then I decided to abdicate because I hate the space stage. Behold, 4,649,989,800 years of Mouthinbutt history, all laid out on one splendid tableau that just happened to all converge on violence. To this day, the Mouthinbutt stands as a testament to hard work and the value of effort. You can do anything you want. You can even take over the whole world even if you were born with your mouth on your butt. And when you don't know, swing your fists in blind fury and throw your butt at a problem, and eventually you'll succeed. Hoo ha, hoo ha. Welcome to another splendiferous Spore video. Evolution is an existential quest for power. All species have this in common, the desire to lust for blood. So today we're going to simulate just one such species in everyone's favorite intergalactic evolution simulator. I'm talking, of course, of Spore. I set out with this goal in mind as the species and named it, the Genocidal. Get it? It's a portmanteau of genocide and rhinoceros. To begin the quest to wipe out every other species in the universe and ascend the intergalactic throne in glory as master of the universe. So it all began 3,829,095,200 years ago, all in the primordial soup of the cell stage. Meet the Genocidal. At this stage of its development, even smaller than an amoeba. Our tale begins here with the early evolution of mean red eyes to show how angry we were at everyone, and express malfeasance to anyone who should make the mistake of locking eyes with our prehistoric protagonist. The Genocidal evolved a horn on its face and mouths on the side of its face for attack, utilizing the momentum from its flagellum to stab vegetarians early in its evolutionary history. This adaptation was so successful among its ancestors that we evolved yet even more horns for the side of our bellies, this time not for attack but for self-preservation, so that even if larger and fiercer predators attacked and attempted to devour us whole, they would perish from the pain of our spiky exteriors ripping up the inside of their mouths. This left the all-but-forgotten smooth-bellied Genocidal to the forgotten past among our ancestors. Naturally, this adaptation grew and proliferated, evolving more and more spikes all over the body of the Genocidal. Pointy, threatening, and dangerous, the Genocidal evolved one cyclops eye and lost its vestigial flagellum, only to be replaced by yet another threatening spike pointing directly out of its rear end for protection from surprise attacks from predators. It is now completely impossible to harm or even touch us at all. No matter how slow or unwieldy we are, if we can get to you, we're going to eat you. Now completely surrounded by quills, the Genocidal has evolved into something stupidly overpowered and just honestly baffling to lookers on. How could anyone possibly approach, let alone digest, such a spiky organism? And, despite how long it takes us to get around the primordial soup, eventually we evolve a brain and legs to walk on, setting in motion the next set of events, leading, of course, to the creature stage. Ah, the creature stage. 2,900,000,000 years after our ancestors' inception into the primordial soup, the Genocidal steps onto land and builds its nest on the sweltering shores of our young planet, destined to make friends and enemies, but mostly enemies. Naturally, our quest for world domination begins by eating all the people who want to be our friends for DNA points. It all begins, of course, with the nice species like the crocus, the spittoon, and the tigre, all of which are honestly too pitiable to behold. We quickly extinct them by bashing our faces into them, unlocking with it enough DNA points to begin the transformation into something more resembling a rhinoceros than before. A goofy nose, 2 eyeballs again, and arms and legs to move around faster on land and charge into people. We extinct the dubla, the oogie, the dukes, and of course, the species known only as Miss Butterfly, none of whom stood a chance against our sharper mandibles, bigger brains, and angrier, downward-pointed eyeballs to display our dominance against all other species than Genocidal. We devoured the flesh of the moopid staggies, the modigals, and then the game unfortunately crashed since the Steam version of Spore it's just a mess. So we just did it all over again, and honestly, I got pleasure out of it. The Jarka, the Dweebly, the Gnarl, and the Brish. None of them held a candle to our pointier horns, stompier feet, or the literal pizza cutters we evolved for ears. We killed every species we met and appropriated their body parts. I'm just gonna say the names of the other species because I like the sound of them. The Whoosies, the Monkey Boys, the Kokimos, the Mothras, the Splurgs, the Doolibs, and of course the Granks. All this to summon the powers to hunt down a rogue Hayton. At which point we claimed another 100 DNA points and took a victory lap to evolve wings and make ourselves look like some kind of nightmarish demonic elephant. I can name all the other species we knocked out, but I think you get the picture. We evolved arms over our other arms. And then the finishing touch, spiky butt cheeks to shoot people with poison. And so, with all that in mind, 3,820,000,000 years from our humble origins, we concluded the creature stage, which leads us, of course, to the tribal stage. The tribal stage. The Genocidal evolved the ability to use tools and communicate to form greater sentences, forming small packs of hunter-gatherers, but mostly hunters, and not gatherers. We donned tribal masks to hide our facial expressions, grew mustaches, and pierced our noses with rings to strike fear into our enemies, to advertise to them how much pain we were capable of withstanding in combat. I made ample use of the baby duplication glitch to pad our numbers with extra warriors, and then it was off to conquer the pink tribe, the cyan tribe, and of course the green tribe. None of whom stood a chance against us, because we had carried over our ability to spit in people's faces at long distance as a ranged attack. Thus, before we even entered into combat, the sheer toxicity of our saliva would wound them mortally sometimes. At last, we appropriated spear technology to conquer the orange tribe and the lavender tribe, who also had thick, luscious rear ends, but lacked the spiky, poisonous butt cheeks required to maintain dominance at the top of the food chain. Not only were we alpha, but we were also the most cultured, donning feather headdresses and skulls on our head to display our kills to our enemies. Thus concluded the tribal stage at last, with no others left standing, and the utter destruction of every single other tribe on the face of the planet. What lay next would be the civil and ideological war among factions we know only as the civilization phase. The civilization phase. Bombs, tanks, nuclear war. These revolutionary ideas set in motion a Genocidal enlightenment, an age of Aquarius. But for all their ideas, the Genocidal species splits in an ideological explosion, some religious, some warlike, and some economical. It's all across the globe in a race for arms, influence, and power. Guns, industry, and productivity will conquer the day as we seize control of the central continent with our gun-mounted cars from the red, purple, and yellow countries, unlocking Genocidal boats and spreading our imperial dominion to the sea and the lands that lay beyond. We break the Geneva Convention, using the gadget bomb to blow up the Blue Nation and plant our flag in their soil, reduced to only ash and rubble. We launched a few more gadget bombs, swarmed our opponents with planes, but this all took a while, so then I just ran out of patience and saved up 48,000 Spore bucks to bomb the living daylights out of everyone in nuclear Armageddon with the iconic series of ICBM, or intercontinental ballistic missile barrages. The world now united, purged of defective factions unnatural to the Genocidal evolutionary chain. There can be only one alpha line. Thus, after 3,829,094,900 years, we entered into the sublime technological revolution of the space stage. So commenced the space stage, which is objectively the worst stage in Spore, most of which took place in bombing everyone else we met. But before we bombed them, we would offer them a trade route. If they accepted, we spared them for the little extra income they offered our empire. If they did not accept, we would relentlessly bomb them with larger and larger payloads until they capitulated. I hate the space stage so much. Every other species is ugly and has cringe dialogue. This was the only playthrough I've ever done where I was totally happy with my decision to bomb, nuke, and wipe out everyone else. They deserve death. But by this time, I'll admit though, I was getting a little bit bored with the Genocidal's violent tendencies. Oh look, another species, we'll just extinct them. How original. The problem is that there are just far too many species in the Spore universe to realistically complete the task of wiping them all out. It would take hundreds of hours, and we've got only a few minutes left in this video for the Deus Ex Machina ending. So naturally, our destructive tendencies came to match with the one and only empire most famed in Spore for being generally abrasive and disagreeable: the Grox. Here's where everything broke down. The Grox were more destructive even than we were. I really hate them, and I think it's just spam and unfair that they exist in the game and control the entire center of the galaxy where the gravitational pull worsens. If you sit in one of their systems even for a few seconds, they'll gang up on you and shoot you with little hope of escape or retaliation, after which you respawn all the way back at the edge of the universe and have to repeat the process all over again. If you should be lucky enough to conquer one of their outposts, it's only a short matter of time before they re-establish their colony and take back once again on the offensive. The only answer to their spam is even worse spam. So instead of confronting the Grox head-on, in the most un-Genocidal fashion, I fled from every Grox conflict in my fully upgraded ship until finally, at last, I made it. The center of the universe. I met Steve, the alien, and obtained the Staff of Life, which, ironically, if you use the Staff of Life on a Grox-inhabited planet, it kills the Grox, but ultimately paves the way not to kill and destroy more species, but instantly terraforms the planet into a lush paradise, ushering in a cornucopia of new life into the universe. New plants, new species, and a breeding ground for yet even more of them. And in the end, ironically, that's the story of how we, of the Genocinoceros, the most violent species to ever inhabit and conquer the cosmos, indirectly became the most productive, peaceful, life-bringing force to ever inhabit the universe. What life would we breed in this newborn, peaceful galaxy? That all remains to future generations to decide. Imagine the smallest thing that you can think of. Then think even smaller. Then think even smaller. Today we're going to be playing Spore, the evolution simulator, as the smallest of species. The Tinypotamus, the teensiest, tiniest creature to ever walk the earth. If you've never played it before, Spore is a game about creating and evolving a species from its humble microscopic origins as a single cellular organism, all the way up through its evolutionary journey to the creature stage and tribal and civilization stages, and then all the way up into the space stage to explore the cosmos and contend with a whole galaxy of other alien species. Normally, I'd play this game as a large and violent animal, but today, for a change of pace, I've decided to embark upon the journey of the smallest of species, and use my small size to my advantage to reproduce and evolve. So, as always, we embark once again, beginning our journey in the creature stage. Ah, the creature stage. The Tinypotamus begins its evolutionary journey on planet Microchondria, the tiniest powerhouse of the galaxy. To begin with, we're just not small enough yet, so it's off to eating a few vegetables, then on to locating a mate and reproduction to make ourselves as small as possible. Just really small. Now, being smaller at first might not seem like such an advantage in a primordial soup filled with large, hungry, imposing, and aggressive predators, but as it turns out, the single-cellular Tinypotamus is able to use its size to dodge past enemies, surviving and even thriving just by running away. And so, very early on, the Tinypotamus developed a slender body, small eyes, a small mouth, and the smallest of flagella, aiding in its escapes to wiggle away from large, hungry predators. Therefore, escape was the evolutionary niche of the early Tinypotamus, as its successful ancestors evolved more and more numerous wiggling flagella sticking out of their butts to make their escape, all directed toward pinpointing and securing vegetables for sustenance, evolving yet even more and more flagella sticking out of their butts. So commenced the first stages of the Tinypotamus's early evolutionary history. As it proliferated and advanced, the most successful among the Tinypotamus species evolved butts that were able to shoot air out the back, propelling our earliest ancestors to delightful dinners of lettuce, far away and safe from the clutches of hungry predators. And despite its size, the Tinypotamus eventually developed a brain big enough to catapult the Tinypotamus into its second stage of evolution, the creature stage. The creature stage. 1,500,000,000 years into the history of the Tinypotamus, our green friend rises to the surface and ventures its first steps onto the sands of planet Microchondria. But that is to say, not before our body gets even shorter, our eyes even tinier, and our mouths as small as one can please. This is truly as small as it is possible to be. A far cry from its cell stage adaptations, being so small rendered the early land-faring variations of the Tinypotamus sluggish and snail-like, inching along the ground at only the slowest of speeds. And so, deprived of its cell stage strengths of being faster than everyone, this forced the Tinypotamus to develop its social skills on land and find a new evolutionary niche. So, our first encounter with the species Chukongi, a species whose name sounds admittedly dirty, begins with the opening of our tiny mouths to raise the beautiful sound of our singing voices, purified by hundreds of millions of years of eating lettuce. It all ends with the obtainment of an alliance, our first friend. Not that we had so many options. That is to say, we are as weak as can be. Literally just a slug with, a deformedly shortened body. So if we don't have friends, we will surely be eaten anyway. After befriending the Chukongi, it's time for the Tinypotamus to get even tinier with the shrinking of our eyeballs and the ensmallification of our mouths. After that, it's on to befriending the Swoo and the Goob, resulting in the enlargification of our brains. If the cell stage Tinypotamus was all about escaping from predators with speed, then the creature stage Tinypotamus's niche was making friends with other people to defend itself because, well, it was just so tiny. So remarkably tiny. After migrating to a new nest, new evolutionary features proliferate among the Tinypotamus. Tiny legs that make the Tinypotamus look admittedly brolic. A single arm with a tiny hand pointing out from the front of its legs. And the weensiest of beaks to make glad little noises and befriend other species. We use our cute new features to impress the Mitosi, the Dweebeeble, and the Atarchus. But then we faceplant and fail horribly to make friends with the Tiki Moonsters, who, despite their festive garb and gregarious outward appearance, are surprisingly hostile. It's time to run away and return to the nest to evolve different features to impress the otherwise unimpressible, hostile, red-faced Tiki Moonsters, and others who would seek otherwise to destroy us and our kind. Our arm moves from between our legs to a position raised wide above our heads in an X shape, signaling a dualistic ritual of approach. Is it that we're putting our arms up in the air to scare you like Ooga Booga? Or are we showing, by raising our arms, that we are unarmed and not a threat? No one really knows. We evolved into a literal X-wing for a little while, grew a bill, and sprouted a tiny alfalfa to display our avant-garde fashionableness to other species. After numerous nest migrations, the Tinypotamus began to venture out into packs and make more friends, all starting with a species known only as ape, who happened to be much larger than us. Still even larger, continuing on to the rogue trilly, which looks like a big banana with spikes sticking out of its butt. Using our siren song, and I can hardly believe this, we managed to befriend this huge guy. From there, it's on to replace our mouths with something goofier, but still tiny. Our hands with handier hands, which are still tiny. And our feet with other feet that were still pretty small. For the next adaptation, it's time to fill our underarms with an impressive array of armpit hair. This will help demonstrate and express our style when fraternizing with new potential allies. And then, to get even smaller, something most unexpected happened to the Tinypotamus. It went from having 2 legs to only 1 leg so that it could be even smaller. This in turn changed its overall body shape from the letter X to the letter Y, a letter which is objectively smaller. And so, hopping around on 1 foot now and proudly displaying its armpit hair for lookers-on to behold and admire, the Tinypotamus, guarded by its strong ape ally, ventures into an encounter with a fearsome predator, the alpha broggle. Normally, this would spell a swift death, but today, the tiny potamus uses its siren song to soothe the hostile, red-faced anger of the Broggle, not only to placate it, but also to make it our new friend. Wow. We are so cute and small that everyone wants to defend us, even if that means killing other people that are just slightly a threat while we're trying to befriend them. Next, we ally with the Frobbit, increase the amount of hair inside of our armpits, and evolve a singular small wing on our back for flapping around with. Surprise! We're coming from out of the sky to befriend you. This continues with more use of the siren song to befriend the hostile species, wee Greevil, who are so evil that they have the word evil in their name, the Rudifus, and at last our anticipated reunion with the Tiki Moonster. This time, not to run away screaming, but win it over with all the new friends we've made. Success. Then it's on to the Mamonkey, the Aver, and the Lahunku, all culminating in the evolution of better mouths, hands, and feet on our little bodies. With all that, we have become the most popular, gregarious species to grace the surface of planet Microchondria, even getting to the point where, when we tried to befriend a hostile Sharkosaurus and soothe it from attack with our siren song, our allies love us too much to watch it attack us and kill it before we can even befriend it. That is to say, maybe if your friends aren't willing to destroy someone at the slightest sign of danger, maybe they're not your real friends after all. And so, 2,280,000,000 years into our evolutionary history, the tiny potamus has finally evolved the intelligence required to pick up tools and enter with it the tribal stage. Ah, the tribal stage. The tiny potamus enters packs, dons clothing in the form of bowler hats and mustaches, and enslaves its former friends. No longer equals, but pets living behind the tribal gatherer hut. Naturally, we rely on the baby hatchling duplication glitch to poop out a whole tribe very quickly. But then suddenly, the emergence of the brown tribe signals a new set of options. We either go to war or cultivate friendship. After quick deliberation, the choice is actually quite obvious. The smallest of strategies to employ would be giving up our food to the neighboring tribe to make ourselves even smaller. We shower the brown tribe with lavish cornucopias of food, but unfortunately, we actually don't because we got into a fight with a giant demon. Oh well, just ignore that for now, but by now, 3 other tribes have spawned, Pink, Lavender, and Cyan, and they all hate us because that's just what they do. Now it's on to a lot of multitasking, sending the Pink tribe presents, then unleashing the soothing, shaking percussions of our maracas upon them to get them all the way up to happy Blueface, guaranteeing that they will never, ever, ever pick a fight with us unprovoked again. Okay, next. Now with all the remaining tribes still trying to kill us and burn down our homes, it's time to bring them gifts. Yes, gifts. To the Lavender Village, even as they are attempting to attack us and destroy our way of life. Success again! And now we are on a roll. They are indifferent to us once again at neutral yellow face until we hit them with the harmonious sounds not only of our maracas, but also of our didgeridoos. Yet another alliance for the tiny potamus. Next, it's time to hit the Cyan tribe with our songs to soothe them as well. And before you know it, we've triggered the late tribal stage crisis, with the yellow tribe spawning in at already angry red face. But we, the tiny potami, are so unmoved by their anger that after we complete the Mexican hat dance at our base, we bring them gifts and poop out fireworks right in front of their chieftain, instantly winning them over as our acquaintance, leaving only one last round of song from our maracas, didgeridoos, and of course our newly invented wooden horns. Now at last, the tribes united and the world won over to the friendly way of the tiny potamus we've cultivated throughout the creature stage, and up until the tribal stage. It's time to move on up to the next phase, the civilization stage. An age of enlightenment. The tiny potamus tribes unite to form a civic enterprise, and it all begins with the design and construction of our central town small, the smallest of town halls, designed in an architectural style to mimic the bodily shape of the tiny potamus with its arms raised in midair. Celebration and gladness is had in the streets. Our vehicles are minuscule. The Nissan Minima, which is, of course, the opposite of the Nissan Maxima. We live in tiny homes with tiny windows and tiny doors. And of course, the streets and corners of Tinypotamus City are dotted by microfilmeries for entertainment, and mini-chondria where the tiny potami go to work every day. All of these buildings are, of course, as small as can be. But now it's time to begin expanding, while staying small. We share our central continent with the purple, red, and orange city-states, but our itsy-bitsy vehicles are too fast to be stopped, and we claim each and every spice geyser on the continent. No contest. Whenever anyone got even a teeny bit mad at us, we just complimented them and their nation and sent them money until they liked us again. Thus, our strategy, by draining our bank accounts, accomplished the being of small. As the world's smallest economy, we had mastered the art of putting microeconomics to war. So naturally, it came as a surprise to everyone when we went to war to conquer the Red Nation through our religious crusade. But they weren't even mad at us because we just kept paying them money to make them still like us as we bombed their city with our brainwashing radio waves. Then we used a hypnotism flying saucer to beam the doctrines of tinypotimism into their brains. The smallest of strategies. Never go to war, but just keep paying and brainwashing people so that they never retaliate. Using this strategy, dubbed the Itsy Bitsy Blitzkrieg, we made our enemies totally happy with us, as we captured and appropriated all of their cities. No one ever really got a chance to dislike us because we just gave them all of our money while we destroyed them in their way of life. With the fall of the Red Nation, the central continent is finally won. And now it's time to design our ships for naval warfare. The Tiny Tannic, as well as, of course, our combat aircraft, the Tiny Copter, shaped in the formation of the letter Y, like the body of the Tinypotamus. And it's complete with propellers on the side to represent our voluptuous armpit hair. And with all that, it's on to the Green Nation, the Blue Nation, and of course the Red Nation, all leading up to the endgame with the unleashment of fanatical uprising, our ultimate ability, which is basically an ideological nuclear missile to assimilate other people's cultures. At last, our mission is complete. We've conquered an entire planet in the tiniest way possible. No blood was shed. No one was even hurt. And we paid and bribed our way out of every single war, every conflict. No one saw it coming before it was too late. And ironically, that's the story of how the smallest species won the biggest of victories through sleuth, deception, and of course, let's never forget, most probable violations of the Geneva Convention. I'm just gonna skip the space stage because I hate it, and there's not really anything else tiny to do. That's it for now.
Hello. For a new challenge, I'm going to see if I can evolve a species in Spore that doesn't have any eyes. Or rather, I won't see, because I won't have any eyes to see anything with. Eyesight, after all, is a burden. Look at all of the things around me that aren't mine. By removing eyesight, we see no evil. No, instead, we will rely on our mouths. Life is hard. We started life as the eyeless. Unfortunately, upon starting the game, you are forced to have eyes. As soon as I possibly could, a new species was created. Smooth and flawless. We face the awkward question of, blind people can't see a radius of like 5 feet around them. I need to be able to eat anything on any side of me and defend myself. The origin of our species was something that would give a child a nightmare. A species that would make Charles Darwin perplexed, or even upset, at how much of an aberration we were from anything natural. Life is simple as a single-celled organism, and all the pressing species-wide questions of extinction and inheritance that we struggle with today are replaced by simpler, more immediate ones such as, what should I eat today? It's a simple life. Throughout the cell stage, literally every other species ran away from me. Or swam, rather. There is no doubt about it. Leaving the eyes off of any creature that you create in Spore makes your creation completely and utterly repulsive and hideous. My species looked more like a diagram in a biology textbook. Completely grotesque. Like a cross-section of genitalia used perhaps by your high school biology teacher for pedagogical purposes. My species was hideous, unfamiliar, and unwanted. But when no one else loves you, at least you still have yourself. Or rather, that is, we had one another. Yes, the members of my species may not have had eyes, but they reproduced sexually. And they used their sense of touch to complete their arousing mating dances. even at the cellular stage, signifying that we were specialized and destined for very great things. I continued my journey into biological misconception down the road of sightlessness by evolving more mouths in more places that no one would expect a mouth to be located. In real life once, I was reflecting as I stood in a crowded train station and a blind man walked directly into me from behind. His face and his entire body suddenly face-planted onto mine. He was a blind young man, and I imagine it must have been extremely jarring to commute blind, but I feared for his safety, and naturally my mind drifted toward how I might act if I were placed in a similar situation. It's a moment that has stayed with me for many years, and I can't honestly imagine what it would be like to really be blind. I was trying to strategize this with my species, though. To substitute, admittedly sometimes when I get out of bed in the middle of the night, and it's dark, I use the memorized distances in my home from my bedroom to the bathroom in order to imagine what life of a blind person must be like. Perhaps it's shallow or flawed reasoning, but I like to wave my arms around me like I'm an octopus, feeling about for obstacles that might collide with my face as I step gingerly over discarded debris and furniture lying about my home. So would my species be designed, to walk like I did as an octopus to the bathroom. I used all of this to strategize the dining habits. If I couldn't see the food around me, every bit of surface area would be a mouth. This train of thought continued into the creature stage, where I still couldn't see anything. I think it's safe to say that the creature stage is easily one of the most universally hated, or at least one of my own least favorite phases of Spore. It's an amazing idea, don't get me wrong, but it's also far less satisfying than the cell stage. The cell stage yields satisfaction at more decided, well-cadenced intervals, cause and effect, work and reward. It's incredibly satisfying to be competing with other organisms, then suddenly you grow to Godzilla size and actually outgrow the predator that was just chasing you because you excelled so exceptionally at eating kale with breakneck rapidity. There's just nothing quite as satisfying in the creature stage. You spend hours trying to follow along with other species' outlandish mating rituals, only to find out that they think you aren't cool or cultured enough to be friends with them. Since I don't support war, and I had begun life as an herbivore, I continued this awful slog far higher into our evolutionary journey than I should have, despite the fact that war was just such a better answer. You might not be able to make friends with everyone, but you can definitely eat everyone. At this point, it merits saying, Spore is a dualistic game. Herbivore or carnivore, life or death, friendship or enemyship. During this period of time, my species encountered an extreme existential crisis almost every single day that caused our evolutionary journey to be humiliating, engaging, and cathartic all at once. That's all to say that it pays to be well decided with what you intend to eat in the future, but you need to be flexible. You can't be a vegan forever, but you might have to be. Did the blindness affect our species? Truth be told, not really. Though it deprived me of seeing the world in oversaturated colors and lush landscapes, which is admittedly probably what makes Spore stand the test of time, along with the delightfully inventive game premise, mechanics, and progression. However, I felt a great deal of imposter syndrome that our species was not like other species. We did not have eyes. We were not welcomed by the Ukka, the Boka, or the species known simply by the letter M, which were just a few of the species I encountered on the planet. For this reason, to be cool enough to hang out with other species, we started modeling ourselves after common household objects, like a literal plant or a flower. Who could refuse to befriend a dancing tree? As it turns out, quite a lot of people could refuse this. I had to keep substituting outlandish parts on our species in a search for a final identity, a final agency that would leave us a lasting legacy in the history of time. Like the ugly duckling, I decided that our species was in fact not a second-rate version of some mere animal that walks the earth. No, but rather a first-rate version of an anthropomorphic plant. Yes, a ficus becomes sentient. Finally, we had transcended ugliness and become unarguably cute, while also being absolutely perplexing to gaze upon. Why were literal plants walking around the planet, trying to make friends with every creature upon whom they chanced to pass? I still shudder to think what Spore would be like if it had been an MMORPG, and knowing the gaming community, I would not let my children play, for fear of the stupid things gamers would put in. I also lied to you at the beginning of this video. I actually played on normal difficulty, and I said that to be edgy. Overall, I found this experience to be truly worthless, and I would not recommend that you play the game blind. There's almost no advantage whatsoever to playing Spore with eyes, and being blind unfortunately covers only part of the screen in a black gradient overlay. Looking for immersion? What did you expect? A completely black screen? Although it's realistic, it just isn't any fun from a game design standpoint. Why would you do that to people? The creature stage is actually the last phase of the game where being blind is a detriment. After that, the game opens up in color no matter what your species looks like. But it's worth noting that it makes literally no difference if you decide to play as some horribly misshapen, malformed troglodyte, or an homage to a household object, such as a houseplant, or some other inanimate object like a chair. If anything, from this point in time, I'm most enthused to return to Spore about the premise of embarking upon the evolutionary journey of several other inanimate objects that can be found lying throughout the house, and calling them challenges in their own right. Throughout the playthrough, I spent most of the rest of my time collecting fossils, failing to impress women from other species, returning to my own, who would always accept me, running away, and being devoured repeatedly by strong, hungry predators. No one loved me. All of my allies were weak, and I was infamously abhorred across the surface of the planet. Probably the most emasculating experience was when another species that resembled a larger plant than my species killed me in front of my allies, who watched with indifference as I hopelessly accepted my fate. Was I to be subsumed by larger plants of the planet? No. Clearly defeat was unacceptable. I cut my losses with our species and cast aside all of the emotion, personal investment, and creative energy I had poured into making our species resemble a houseplant, and I slowly began breaking out of the standard mold. I was completely fed up with being bullied by other species, and failing to impress the other species into being my allies. We were such tryhards by doing that, and we sold ourselves into a cheap strategy to advance farther into DNA progress. My only friends that stayed with me for the very brief time were weaker than me, and it was humiliating to need their help. I'm truly happy that it's over. I'm still trying to block it out of my memory. As we approach the end of the creature stage and acquire the extremely advanced body parts, I have made us turn temporarily into evolution chads at the top of the food chain by shooting venom like torpedoes at long-range distances at enemies, picking people off, and sacrificing the other members of my species to acquire valuable DNA points. Yes, I had it up to here with making friends. The truth is that it's much easier to make people hate you than it is to make people like you. Just think about it. You can only have a limited number of friends, but you can have as many enemies as you want. And it doesn't take all of this emotional energy invested into your friendship to maintain, or even, in a sense, nurture a relationship that involves people's contempt for you. I'm not saying that this is a good way to live your life. I'm saying that it's a great way to live your life, and we could take a hint from Spore. Why would you waste your time on mating dances to befriend people with overly high standards? Spore is a simulation of hierarchy and class-based societies, where many generations of people keep trying repeatedly, one after the other, generation by generation, to change themselves, somewhat like Dr. Seuss's star-bellied Sneetches, in order to reach vague status symbols that are highly arbitrary and not necessarily even a good thing, or yielding greater utility for society. Spore is an exercise in futility. Change is hard, but perhaps there's hope for the one species that rises above the evolutionary cycle, like humans have with the new phenomenon of epigenetic evolution. Now I'm getting a little sidetracked. I did a lot of thinking about society while I played this game. I just find that every game I play has this sort of neurotic, philosophical undercurrent that I find more engaging than the actual gameplay itself. I think the longer I create videos, the more I get at that. It's what makes certain games precious to me and keeps me coming back for more. It's an escape from real life, and it plants the seed of a memory that stays with me and which I carry out into the real world that reflects some deeper part of thinking. To me, the blind challenge gets at the heart of what I most enjoy about video games, and it's something similar to what movies offer to their audiences, an escape from real life, albeit more engagingly by taking advantage of more of our brains for increased engagement. The blind challenge offered me an opportunity at exploring more of the game's mechanics via scarcity. Games aren't fun when they're too easy. Difficult experiences are more exciting and you learn more from them. I saw, or rather felt Spore in an entirely different way than I ever had through the blind challenge, and completing it made me even more inventive, perhaps, about the game's mechanics, which I imagine will make future challenges yet even more niche, specific, and engaging. To close, I temporarily evolved our species into a buff Chad that shot toxic out of its eye holes, not eyeballs, from afar, and then ran away to obtain help from the other pack members before quickly reverting back into plant form. Call it cheesy, I did what I had to. I had died so many deaths, I had had so many babies, But the most disturbing and perhaps existentially confusing behavior was yet to come. I love Spore because it's an old game and it has many old cutscenes. They're cinematic and they feel more like watching a nature documentary than actually playing a game. The most disturbing behavior of our existentially confused eyeless species was still yet to emerge at the tribal stage. I was aghast as the trees I had created uttered incomprehensible jungle talk, and I stared open-mouthed at my computer screen. Upon reaching this phase, I decided that the blind challenge was complete, having taken it as far as it would affect my species. Once you reach the tribal stage, you can see in color again, so to be fair, your species can look like literally anything at this phase. I will be back. It's exciting to think that you can play as literally anything beyond the creature stage, and it won't affect you whatsoever. Plants are only the beginning. Prepare for a plethora of inanimate objects that I will play as a species. Though next time, I'm prepared for the species to make a more decided stance on the whole herbivore-carnivore issue. And I think violence might be the only good answer here, unfortunately, which is somewhat one-dimensional, but at least consistent in practice. They say you need to find your niche, your special place if you want to survive and thrive, and I look forward to traversing the evolutionary journey of an anthropomorphic pair of scissors, or something like that next.